We live in a world today of unlimited opportunity, but only for those of us who can take massive action toward our goals. And while modern technology is responsible for much of this incredible opportunity, our technology also comes with an insane level of distraction and vice that can keep us from ever realizing our true potential. And this is where most guys sit today. They're trapped, wasting their time and energy scrolling, watching porn, playing video games, or indulging in other useless activities. My name is Mark Kweppett, and I'm here to help you eliminate escapism and unleash your apex potential. You see, I've struggled with a lack of productivity over the years, and I've read dozens of books on the topic to try and solve it. And luckily, I have. I can now easily get as much done as I want on any given day, whether it's, a ton, I can work all day, or I can just, get a highly focused block in if that's all I'm feeling. And today, I'm going to be talking to you about the 3 books that hold the most important insights that have helped me reach this place in my own productivity journey. Each book brings with it something totally different, and I believe that if you adopt their core principles and integrate them in the way that you live, you will reach entirely new levels of operation. So, let's get into it. The first book is Deep Work by Cal Newport. So when I started working for myself as a 23-year-old guy, fresh out of college, looking to build my coaching business, my work routine was a total joke. I could maybe focus for 30 to 45 minutes before I'd end up distracting myself with porn, video games, or some other form of digital time wasting. And a big part of this was because I was, really addicted to this stuff, and it really screwed up my neurochemistry. But perhaps an even deeper issue is that I never really trained my mind for intense cognitive effort, especially outside the clearly defined requirements needed to perform in school. So at first, I slowly started to try and improve my ability to focus through using the Pomodoro technique. For those of you who aren't familiar, that's where you set a timer for 25 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break, then you go back to 25 minutes, 5-minute break, another 25, and then maybe a longer break. So basically my goal was to try and hit a certain number of these 25-minute blocks per day. And when I combined this approach with quitting porn and moderating my other vices, I started to see great progress. It got to the point where I was actually able to work a semi-respectable amount each day. But as my focus improved, those 25-minute blocks kind of became cumbersome and annoying to work around, and then I also often found myself bouncing around between different tasks and getting scattered. Luckily, around 2016, when this book was released, I read Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, and that really helped solve these problems that I was dealing with. All right. So the practical point of the book is this, that you need to block out and protect large chunks of uninterrupted time where you can lose yourself in focusing deeply on high value projects. And that might sound kind of obvious, and, in retrospect it is, but at the time, I was bouncing around all over the place, working in these little tiny chunks, whatever. And once I read the book, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And so there's a few reasons why these deep work periods where you are just completely uninterrupted and are able to go deep are very important. First, it costs a bunch of energy and time to simply fill your brain with all the relevant information and variables necessary to do work of any complexity. So if you're always starting and stopping or switching tasks, then you're wasting a bunch of time calibrating your brain to get things done. You want to load up and then make real progress before you put the activity down. Second, this kind of work is very good at creating new neural pathways that aid in creative breakthroughs and mastery of your craft. Personally, I noticed that after practicing deep work, my rate of breakthroughs on my creative stuff, the creation of my content, all that kind of stuff, it skyrocketed. And what was weird is I would have some of the breakthroughs while doing the deep work, but honestly, most of them happened after a deep work session. It was kind of like my brain just got worked out and got filled with all this new information and thoughts and ideas and options. And then when I would step away from it, my brain would digest it, go to sleep, I'd wake up, and then all of a sudden, boom, tons of new insights when I got back to it. And then the third valuable thing about deep work is that most people don't like to do it. Okay, but those who can build a habit of it have a massive competitive advantage because most people really, they just aren't willing to sit down and focus for a long period of time. And I've seen that myself. It's kind of part of I think it's really the key today for anyone who's a knowledge worker to become indispensable. people ask me a lot of times, like, hey, where did you get your ideas from? And of course, I've got some ideas that, I've sourced from other people, like the stuff in this book, but a lot of the stuff that I produce, it's really my own original thought. That's just the result of hours and hours and hours and hours of deep work thinking about these sorts of things. Okay. And so, if you want a competitive advantage in this world, you got to be willing to do deep work. And so once I started taking my deep work sessions seriously, often accomplished through like a 3-hour trip to a coffee shop or library, where I'd lock in with some white noise in my headphones and just double down on one thing, I saw incredible improvements in my ability to make good content, solve business problems, and generally enjoy my work more. And then sometimes for even big projects, I might like lock myself away for a weekend or dedicate a whole day where I, have no one interact with me at all, and I'm just doing deep work block after deep work block. But generally, now I just kind of, plop them in my calendar where is appropriate depending upon what I'm trying to do. But really the reality here is if you cannot cultivate a habit of doing deep work, then you're going to have a really hard time doing great work. Okay. So now that's Deep Work by Cal Newport. Now we're on to the second book. And in this one, we're going to be kind of looking in the polar opposite end of the spectrum with Someday is Today by Matthew Dicks. If I were to summarize my main takeaway from this book, it would be to value every second of life to do what you want, including and specifically all those random little chunks of 5 to 10 minutes that exist throughout your day. Frankly, I think he should have called the book Hustle, because I feel like this is the best explanation of hustle that I've ever read and encapsulates his most valuable point. So a little context here. You see, when I read this book, I was really struggling. My business was in like a very critical point where we're trying to figure out how to scale things, and it was really, difficult. My wife was having a lot of significant health issues, and so I had to try and take care of her, and she couldn't help as much. And then I also had a little daughter who was running around and demanded a lot of time and attention, as little girls do. And my days, they became kind of like this blur of oddly sized time chunks that were split up between childcare, client work, content creation, admin tasks, and attempting to at least try and keep up with basic household chores. Frankly, I felt pulled in a million different directions all at once. And until that point, I had primarily relied upon being able to schedule deep work blocks to keep up with everything. But my space to do that kind of deep work had shrank considerably, leaving me left with tons of those oddly shaped bits of time to try and fit everything else in. So coming from that deep work mentality, I felt like, always overwhelmed, unable to block out enough uninterrupted focus to like get into that zone. And that's where Someday is Today really helped me out. The author of the book, Matthew Dicks, he's a kind of like a different kind of guy. Okay. Like he's had some very unique experiences in his life that has left him like profoundly valuing every single minute of his life. And he's also a really great storyteller. That's one of his things. So, he's got some good stories in there that kind of explain where he's coming from, and it makes a lot of sense. But through his insight, reading about his story, reading about how he lives, he really let me know that I was being kind of a big wuss. Like, I don't know anyone who does as much as Matthew Dicks does, at least according to him. Because, he says he runs multiple businesses, he's published 8 books, he writes a daily blog post, he's got kids, and then also on top of all that, he works still full time as a school teacher, which I think is pretty wild. If I'm being honest, I think his attention is scattered in a wildly inefficient way, and he'd probably be way more successful if he just focused himself a little bit more. But that's not why you read this book. You don't read Someday is Today if you're trying to get focused. Okay, you read Someday is Today if you're trying to do more, and that's what he's an expert at. Anyway, he seems to love his life, so whatever works for him. But the thing that really stuck with me is how he stressed that the key to all of his productivity is filling in those random 5, 10, 15-minute chunks of awkward time in life, either writing, doing chores, working on a business, or whatever. Basically, all this stuff that I used to think could like only fit inside of like deep work, I realized, I'm just kind of being a wuss. Like, it doesn't have to do that. Yeah, some of the stuff, deeper and more important things that are much more cognitively demanding, yeah, they probably demand deep work. And deep work is really efficient when you can get it. But when you can't, you can still get a heck of a lot done in 10 minutes. So if deep work is all about conditioning yourself to do that heavy work of breaking down the big rocks in your life, someday is today is about cultivating sort of an omnipresent hustle that lets you take care of the smaller stones and pebbles. And now breakdown work is either deep work or hustle work. And some tasks, naturally lend themselves to one or the other. But in doing this, I can get way more done during my work hours than I otherwise would be able to, because I get a big deep work block in, and then I just, slot in the other stuff into my schedule around meetings and that kind of stuff. And so that's our second book. And this brings us to the final book I want to talk about. And the final book is The 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch. You see, you can put as many hours as you want into your work, but unless you target your efforts properly, you'll be trading success for merely being busy. So to solve this, you need to learn how to focus on what's most important. And I think Richard Koch's book, The 80-20 Principle, lays bare the universal mechanics for doing this. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the 80-20 principle, aka the Pareto principle, is the idea that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts. So for example, 20% of criminals commit 80% of the crimes. 20% of drivers cause 80% of all traffic accidents. 80% of pollution originates from 20% of factories. 20% of a company's products represent 80% of their sales. And the list goes on and on. This is just like a general power law in the universe. Now, it doesn't always necessarily have to be exactly 80-20. It could be something like 90-10 or 95-5 or even 99-1, where 1% of the input produces 99% of the output. And it all depends on what kind of system you're examining. The important thing is to recognize that certain inputs usually produce way bigger outputs, and you want to find those, okay? Because productivity is really a game of producing more value for less cost. So, for example here, okay, which business owner is more productive, okay? Would it be the solopreneur, the one-man show who works 80 hours a week and takes home $100,000 a year? Or would it be the founder of a 5-person company who works 20 hours per week but takes home $1 million per year? Well, the solopreneur, he's definitely working more hours, but is he more productive? Well, if you don't count for vacation, the solopreneur makes on average about $24 per hour worked. The founder, on the other hand, he averages $961 per hour work. And so if we look at productivity as productivity as producing more value for less cost, then the founder is clearly way more productive. It was this kind of thinking that really got me to make my first hire in my own business. I was spending way too much time doing low value work that, I could pay someone a few dollars to do, instead of working on the $1,000, even $10,000 per hour work that only I could do and would really move the needle in my business and in my life. But it doesn't need to just be about money. You compare 2 hours mindlessly scrolling the internet versus 2 hours catching up with a couple of good friends. Which one is higher value to you? See, the 80-20 principle is all about getting you to continuously search for and double down on higher leverage activities, both in a personal sense and in a professional sense. And it gets even crazier when you realize that 80-20 is actually a recursive function, meaning that inside that 20% of high impact work, there's another 20% that produces 80% of that value, opening up kind of like this infinite game of growing through leverage. So what we've got now is we've got deep work for the big stuff, mini hustle chunks for smaller stuff, and then we've got the 80-20 principle to help us decide what to focus on. But there is one more problem. And the problem is, well, how are you going to get yourself to actually do these things? How are you going to get yourself to actually do your deep work or, do your little hustle chunks or whatever it is, okay? Well, that, my friends, is all about what goes on between your ears. Okay. What if you could program your brain to embrace these principles? What if you could rewrite your thoughts to banish the negative beliefs and distracting emotions that hold you back? Well, you can, okay? Because I'm going to be releasing a brand new guide on what I call Metascript journaling here soon. It'll be a massively updated version of the guide that I released to great success several years ago. So if you want to learn how to transform your life through simple, short journal entries, then click the link in the description and get on the wait list. When it comes to high leverage activities, that's what we're talking about with the 80-20 principle, I frankly think that metascripting is arguably the highest leverage routine that exists. Because if you can keep your head and heart optimized for action, then everything else flows from that. So click the link and sign up today. Anyway, that's about all I have for you guys. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'll see y'all in the next one. Ooh, yeah.